Haiti is in crisis as armed gangs come together and storm the island's national institutions, leading to mass prison breaks. US-backed Prime Minister Ariel Henry, who was abroad, desperately trying to negotiate some kind of foreign intervention, has resigned. The question is, who or what will fill that power vacuum? Welcome to this week's Mintcast. I'm your co-host today, Alan McLeod. Many in the West are openly calling for another US intervention on the Caribbean island. But how did Haiti get like this in the first place? Why are tensions coming to a head now? And how does this fit into more than 100 years of US imperialism on Haiti? To answer these questions, I'm joined today by Jake Johnston. Jake is Senior Research Associate at the Center for Economic Policy Research, one of the very few DC think tanks that is actually not terrible, in my opinion. He is the lead author of CEPR's Haiti Relief and Reconstruction Watch blog and the author of the book Aid State, Panic, Disaster Capitalism, and the Battle to Control Haiti. Welcome to the show, Jake.
Thanks for having me.
So, Prime Minister Ariel Henry has recently resigned and appears amid what really seems to be a mass armed insurrection inside the country. What does this mean for Haiti's future?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing to understand with Henry and the current situation, and we can talk about 100 years of U.S. imperialism in Haiti, but we don't need to go back that far to understand some of the proximate causes of the situation today, which really has been for the last 30 months, right? Ariel Henry has been the sole power in Haiti. There's no elected officials, and he rose to power with the backing of the international community after the assassination of Jovenel Moïse. And so while Haitians have been protesting this government, calling for negotiations, calling for his resignation, calling for some power sharing, calling for anything to try and create some space for real governance and improvement in people's lives. And those efforts have been continually rebuffed by the United States and other actors in the national community who instead have backed Henry to the tilt just up until recently and 2 weeks ago when they pulled that support when he was locked out of the country and sort of has forced his hand to resign. But that insistence on backing Henry against so much of what was clear to everyone and what Asians have been arguing for years has really turned this situation upside down. And I think the other thing to understand, though, is that it's easy to look at the situation today and see a power vacuum. Henry being forced out, armed groups sort of seizing some of that limelight, no clear government alternative, internationally backed negotiation process coming up with a new council. But we take a step back and realize that the state is not present in most people's lives in Haiti, right? The situation in terms of their relationship with the government and the state is not really that different today as it was 2 years ago, 2 weeks ago, or 100 years ago, right? Because the Haitian state has not been accountable to or representative of the Haitian people. It has been responsive to external actors and to a certain small segment of the Haitian population for a very, very long time. And so we have to understand that broader context, right? That the absence of the prime minister does not really materially affect most people's lives in Haiti.
Well, I mean, as you said, Henry wasn't even in the country at the time. He was trying to come back from Kenya, where presumably he was trying to drum up support for more foreign intervention, where Kenya would have been the figurehead in that alliance. Although, of course, you have to remember, Kenya would not have been the driving force behind it. That would have been Western powers, probably the United States. Nevertheless, it was reported that Kenya got cold feet at the 11th hour and pulled out of the deal. Despite this, many in the West are still calling for an intervention. Here's a quote from Chatham House, a big think tank. "This time, Haiti is really on the brink. The US and the UN must act to restore order," they wrote. Meanwhile, the Washington Post called for a more, quote, robust and, quote, broader intervention than the one the UN had suggested, which might see American boots on the ground for the third time in 30 years. What do you think the likelihood of another Western intervention in Haiti is, and what would that look like?
Well, I think the reality is it's quite likely. Kenya, has ostensibly put this plan on hold pending the formation of a new transitional government in Haiti. Though a day later, Secretary of State Blinken directly spoke with Kenyan President Ruto, and the announcement right after that was, the plan is back on, where we are coming. And so it looks like there's significant pressure to move forward with this. And then on the Haitian side, right, this transitional government negotiation process that is being done with external actors, the US, CARICOM, Canada, France, and others, And this was a process that certainly involved Haitians, but the outcomes were largely determined by external actors who preconditioned participation in this council on acceptance of this Kenyan security support mission that again was negotiated by this illegitimate Henry administration prior, right? And whether you think in the end that the Haitian police and people need external security support in one way or another, conditioning participation in a new government on accepting that is very obviously wrong and a form of political interference that, again, regardless of what you think is the best outcome of this, is going to make the job of this transitional council, if it ever becomes a thing, that much harder, because their legitimacy certainly is going to be undermined by the role that international actors have played in creating the council in the first place.
Yeah, it really is extraordinary how the only way you can get onto this council is if you accept that we need some sort of intervention, and then the US will turn around and say, well, we're being invited by the Haitian government or the representative council to intervene. It's beautiful circular logic there.
Of course. We've seen this from the United States though for years, right? And we've just talking about the last couple of years, and but even there, right? Once we saw this happen, the U.S. turned on Henry and asked for his resignation. They then switched to saying, "Well, we've been pushing for a broader transitional government for a year. We knew this was necessary." And I think everyone in Haiti was like, "Well, what are you talking about? You've been the main reason that we haven't been able to do this for 2 years, not actually supporting these, right?" So, what is declared at foggy bottom press conferences or on calls with other foreign leaders are really irrelevant. And I don't think many people on the ground care much about what is said. What matters is the actual effect of these policies and what people actually see as the result of them. And that certainly hasn't inspired confidence.
Yeah, and there's not been too much media coverage of those little intricacies. In fact, what we do see out of the media is it seems that the coverage is kind of, I think, a little bit stunted. They describe Haiti as a country being overrun by senseless armed gangs, and some of the more breathless coverage has even claimed that these gangs are groups of cannibals roaming the streets looking around for people to kill, perhaps riffing off the fact that one of the principal leaders of these groups is Jimmy Cherizier, nicknamed Barbecue. My question is, what have you made of the media coverage? And could you tell us a bit more about how these groups gained political power? Where do they come from? Where do they get their...
Yes, certainly. I think what we've seen is, in recent weeks is, what Asians have seen for centuries, which is, the media and foreign actors are feeding into the worst racist tropes that we, again, have seen pop up. These were the same things that media were saying in the early 20th century during the U.S. occupation, right? These are the same things that we've seen time and time again. And they feed into a narrative that's not just racist and wrong, but also has real policy implications, because the takeaway from all of this is, well, Haiti clearly can't govern itself. And so it all serves, right, as further justification for further international intervention. And yet there's very little sort of, again, taking a step back and saying, well, actually, it was that international intervention as much as anything else that is responsible for this breakdown that we see today, right? And so, again, you see this circular sort of logic where it's feeding into a response that is, in fact, part of the problem. And I think that's a big concern, obviously, because something new does need to happen. And yet we're falling into these patterns that have existed around Haiti for a very, very long time. And I think the other thing we have to understand is Haiti is not just Port-au-Prince, right? Haiti is a big country with 12 million people. It is not just violence and chaos, right? There's amazing things happening at the grassroots level all over the country, people coming together and organizing, and not all of them have arms, right? The armed groups have sucked up the space in recent days, but they're not the actors who have been organizing communities. And in fact, over the last number of years, these armed groups have made that kind of work, right? Real progressive change impossible. They have been tools of repression for the political elite and for the economic elite that have thwarted the efforts of grassroots organizations and others to come together and organize and build something new for the nation, right? So now they've turned around, they've joined forces, they are talking about revolution, But the victims of these armed groups for a long, long time and continuing today have largely been the most impoverished members of Port-au-Prince, right? And so we need to keep that in mind. This is not, as simple a narrative as we can often see presented. I think the other thing we have to understand is this didn't come out of nowhere. It's not just that there are politicians and economic actors that have facilitated the rise of these armed groups through arms trafficking, through funding and things like this, and through their own political ambitions. But there's a deeper issue here, which goes back again to the absence of the state, a broken social contract that has left huge parts of the country, and in particular importance in this current debate around the armed groups, the popular neighborhoods of the capital, right, have been totally left out of the state apparatus for a very, very long time. And so this isn't a phenomenon. This isn't something that we can see simply through a good versus evil lens, or think that force alone is a response to this phenomenon. It's not. It's certainly not over the long run. And so we need to be honest about that. We need to recognize that until social justice becomes part of the agenda for the Haitian state and for the international actors who are continually supporting it, and whether we like it or not, are going to be involved in what happens in Haiti, at least in the short run, right? That is a reality. There needs to be real engagement with these communities, and not necessarily, right? I'm not necessarily talking about the leaders of armed groups, but the communities, the people that have, that where these armed groups have arisen from over many years.
Yeah, some of them are talking about revolution, and they've come together in a broad alliance. It's often described as a sort of living together alliance. And yeah, I was wondering, you used the word revolution. Do you think that is a possibility right now, and what would that look like? Or is that just too difficult to predict right now?
Look, obviously, it's difficult to predict. I think making projections on what's going to happen tomorrow, let alone in a week, is obviously difficult. Things are moving really quickly. I think there's plenty of reasons to not trust the rhetoric that we're hearing, right? And I think this is something that we would apply in any situation when political leaders or others are making grandiose speeches. Do we take them at their word, or do we look at what's actually happening? Do we try and investigate the motivations and what's really pushing things behind the scenes, right? So I am very reticent to take anybody at their word in the current moment. And certainly when we're seeing these actual actions. So you can talk about revolution all you want, but the people who are paying the price today are the people you're saying you're trying to liberate, right? People are struggling to get clean water. They're struggling to get food. Their homes have been destroyed. 350,000 people in the popular neighborhoods of the capital, the backbone of any revolutionary movement, have been displaced, have been entire communities that organizing has happened for decades, that overthrew Duvalier, that led to the rise of Aristide. Those communities have been destroyed by these armed groups, right? And so we need to take a step back and look at what these broader dynamics are and what real role these armed groups have played in Haiti. They're taking credit for getting rid of Henry today. And no doubt the closure of the airport and the attacks we've seen over the last couple of weeks have forced international hands and have forced Henry out of the country. But these armed groups have helped prop Henry himself up for the last 30 months. And we can look even at the actions of Jimmy Cherizier, who claims to be opposed to foreign intervention and opposed to Henry. He blockaded a fuel terminal in 2022. Now, this was, again, ostensibly, based on his rhetoric, aimed at overthrowing Henry. But it did very little to affect Henry's political standing. It did cause significant harm to the population, who was cut off of access from fuel, from water, from food, and medical supplies as things started running out. And in fact, it was that blockade that became the actual justification for Henry's request for foreign intervention in the first place. And as soon as that request was made, a deal was reached between the actors blocking the terminal and the government to unblock the terminal. And so for me, I think the actions of these armed groups has done more to justify foreign intervention than stop it, and done more to support Henry and perpetuate his power over the last 3 years than undermine it. And so again, we need to take a broader look and not just look at rhetoric from the last 2 weeks, but actually the actions and the lived experience of people to understand what the real motivations are here.
Okay, yeah, I mean, for years now, it seems that Haiti, every time I cover the country, it seems like they're just having near constant ongoing protests against this government. And despite being barely covered in the Western media and having often been brutally suppressed, these anti-government protests have really led to a really sense of we have to change something in the atmosphere that sort of just continues to grow. Could you just fill us in on why this current government was so unpopular in the first place?
Before we get there, I want to back up just a second because we're talking about these armed groups and massive protests, right? And there's a direct connection here because in 2018, there were nationwide protests, and this was still under the administration of Jovenel Moïse. And there were nationwide protests, hundreds of thousands of people all over the country taking to the streets and protesting the government and demanding accountability for massive corruption that was happening inside the government. It had been happening. And when we really see the strength of these armed actors growing is as a direct response to these protest movements. So you saw more guns coming into those communities, more money going to those communities, because the base of these protests, certainly at least in the capital, were these popular neighborhoods. And so then gaining control over them so you could prevent people from protesting became extremely important for political actors and their allies in the private sector. And so the desire to prevent these mass protests is also directly related to the rise and the increasing power of armed groups in Haiti, because they have been means of social control, not social liberation. And so when we get into the issue of Henry, again, we talked about this a little bit already. Why was he so unpopular? And we have to go back to two key things. One, he was named 2 days before the assassination of Jovenel Moïse in July 2021. Jovenel Moïse was also facing tremendous issues with his legitimacy. Many people in Haiti considered his mandate to have already expired, and he was ruling by decree without any oversight already. And so even that appointment by Jovenel Moïse would have been seen as illegitimate in the eyes of many Haitians. Then after the assassination, what brought Henry to power, it was basically a tweet, a press release from the core group, this group of international diplomats that has functioned as a de facto fourth branch of government since the 2004 coup against Aristide, urged Henry to form a government. And lo and behold, he became prime minister and formed a government the next day. And so the origin of that was extremely problematic, right? There was a legitimacy crisis from day one. More importantly is what's happened over the last 2+ years, which is quite simply the situation getting worse and worse and worse for most people in Haiti. And there's no other person in power, right? There's no elected officials. It's one person there. And so, of course, that person is going to face tremendous blame. And it's not just that he's the only one there. Henry has been incredibly implicated in the assassination of Jovenel Moïse. He had phone calls both before and after with one of the principal suspects. One of his top security officials was also very close to multiple suspects in the assassination. And so, this person, Henry, presented himself and was sort of accepted by the international community as this technocrat able to lead a transitional government to clean elections. And yet 30 months passed, corruption proliferated, armed groups proliferated, the situation deteriorated on the ground, and Henry seemed incapable or unwilling to actually do anything for the population. And so all of these dynamics, the role of international actors, his own inabilities, his own corruption have ultimately created the situation that we're in today.
Yeah, I think it's perfectly reasonable to see Jovenel Moïse, certainly by the end of his rule as a dictatorial president, propped up by the United States. And that does lead me into something I did want to touch on quite prominently here. I wanted to get into the topic of imperialism, because a lot of people look at Haiti and think it's this law of nature that the island should be the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. However, when we look at the long history of Haiti, from being a French slave colony to independence to constant American interference, that's really shaped the destiny of this island. Could you tell us a bit about that history? Can you fill us in on that?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think, in the end, we can't understand Haiti today without understanding this history of colonialism, imperialism, right, that have shaped so much of what we've seen. It's easy, right, to look at the situation today, throw your hands up, say, oh, Haiti's a failed state. They've never been able to govern themselves. And so this is only going to continue, right? I prefer the term aid state, because I think what that gets at is the role that external actors have played in shaping that very state, in propping it up. And so we've seen this throughout Haiti's history. From the U.S. side, we could go back to the revolution, to French colonialism, and to the Independence Day and all these things. But from the U.S. side, of course, the 19-year occupation, that began in 1915 that drastically reshaped the country's political and economic life, that created the institution of the military that then, with U.S. support, ruled the country post-occupation. U.S. support for the Duvalier dictatorship out of fear of Castro and the Cuban Revolution spreading, right? Duvalier was a bulwark against communism, and that's why the United States overlooked gross repression under his rule and his son's rule over a period of 30 years. And then we get to Haiti's turn to democracy in 1990, the first free and fair election of Jean-Bertrand Aristide, which came as a total surprise to the international community in the United States. But of course, then there was a coup just 9 months later by the military. And what has later emerged, certainly there were members within that military and the death squads that formed after that were on the payroll of the CIA. And so while the U.S. imposed an embargo that financially crippled the country and had a huge effect on the population itself, the state was basically run as a narco state that included generals on the CIA payroll, right? So there's a long history going back there. And fast forward, we've got the 2004 coup against Aristide. And this was something that was years in the making. International officials, this is how we see aid being used to shape political developments. From the moment Aristide took office in 2001, the Bush administration cut funding, right? Development banks, the World Bank, the IDB cut funding for clean water projects and things like this. Election observers who have signed off on years since in the most fraudulent, nonsensical, low turnout elections that nobody in Haiti trusted and say, yes, this is legitimate. Well, back then, no, this is illegitimate, right? So feeding into that undermining of the government. So you can see all these soft power tools that are used to undermine governments. And then, of course, there was the coup itself. And then the 13-year-long UN occupation of the country under the MINUSTA peacekeeping operation from 2004 to 2017. As we discussed earlier, the formation of this core group that has been sort of a political check on Haitian administrations ever since. The overturning of the 2010 election results after the earthquake, where the United States pressured the Haitian government, tried to fly the president out of the country, and then told him in no uncertain terms, your preferred candidate is not going to make it to the second round election. And they ended up coming in, overturning the results of the election and ushering in this right-wing government into power. And that individual, Michel Martelly, and his political acolytes have really been in power ever since and have overseen this disintegration of so many aspects of the Haitian economy, security in the country. And again, we see the little ways that this happens, right, over time. So you mentioned Jovenel Moïse, right? There was a question about when his mandate ended. Constitutional scholars and others believe that it was in 2021, February 7th, 2021. Others argued it was in 2022. This is obviously a question for the Haitians to determine, right? And yet on February 6th, 5th, just before this moment, at the State Department, a U.S. official gets on and says, it is our interpretation that Jovenel Moïse's mandate runs until 2022. It's not up to us to interpret Haiti's constitution, right? But that serves as a clear sign of support. And that allows Haitian leaders, when they get that support from the U.S., instead of to look internally to build a coalition to actually broaden their support, to work with other parties, they don't need to do that, because when you have that foreign support, you think you can just run straight forward by yourself. And I think in many ways, it was that support from the U.S. that empowers Jovenel Moïse to believe that he could continue on the path that he was on. And ultimately, that led to his assassination in July of 2021.
Yeah, I mean, as I said earlier, it's not a law of nature that Haiti should be poor. And in fact, if we go back 200 plus years, Haiti was actually fantastically wealthy, or rather, I should say, creating wealth for others. It was really the jewel in the crown of the French Empire. The island was producing a gargantuan amount of sugar or cotton. I've seen figures saying that it was producing something like 50% of the world's sugar and large amount of cotton, which of course, back during the Industrial Revolution, cotton was really the oil of today, So Haiti was just like producing all this wealth for France. It was getting sucked back into Europe. And then something extraordinary happened in 1791, where this colony of slaves started an uprising, which lasted for 13 years, and it was ultimately successful. Haiti managed to throw off the French Empire. It managed to beat off the United States and the United Kingdom as well, and proclaim itself an independent Black republic. I mean, it was the first country that abolished slavery. It wasn't the United Kingdom that abolished slavery first. It was actually Haiti. And because of this it was punished for centuries by the imperial powers like the United States, which refused to recognize Haiti for decades. And of course, in fact, the reason the United States actually did recognize Haiti half a century later was after the Civil War, where they were rather hoping that a lot of the freed black people would actually just go to Haiti and just leave the country. So it wasn't for, some sort of lovely reason that the United States finally
No, and
decided.
even then, right? I mean, the only reason why you could even admit it then was because, you were already sort of reckoning with these dynamics at home, but you had to deny it for 60 years because the US was scared of what that would send a message to its own enslaved population, right? You couldn't even acknowledge the existence of the Haitian Revolution or the Haitian state. And,
Yeah,
obviously this has been a through line for a very long time, right? Right
yeah,
back to the revolution. And I think, it is an important point, right? Haiti's current state of underdevelopment, the fact that everyone knows about Haiti, the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere, and it's often contrasted with the Pearl of the Antilles in French colonial rule. But, as this was not well for the majority of Haitians, right? 90% of the population at the time were enslaved and had recently been brought from Africa and did not share in that wealth, right? It were French merchants and foreign landholders who were extracting that wealth. And that too is a through line to the Haiti of today, because in so many ways, that extractive relationship between the state and the Haitian population, again, has been perpetuated for more than 2 centuries. And that is perpetuated certainly not only by international actors. It takes local participants to implement some of these policies at times when there isn't an overt occupation happening or something like that, but certainly perpetuated and stoked by these very international actors who were involved in this history 200 years ago and remain involved in Haiti's affairs today.
yeah, and of course, for the crime of liberating itself, Haiti was forced. The world powers really did a huge blockade of the island and forced Haiti to pay reparations to France for freeing itself. So yeah, there was one group paying reparations to another group, but it was actually the slaves paying reparations to their masters for the loss of property, the property being themselves. And of course, Haiti didn't finish actually paying that back
Insane.
to France till 1947, right? So that's like more than a century of continued servitude to Europe just for the crime of wanting to be free. And of course, once
And
France,
I think important.
on you go, sorry.
Sorry, I think one important point to note. I mean, there have been estimates around what the current value, right, of the cost of this independence debt was at over $20 billion, and Haitian governments, though, have rarely brought this up. But there was a time when they did. Right, Aristide did bring this up in 2003 and started pushing for reparations. And there was a big New York Times series on this a few years ago, and there's a quote from the French ambassador at the time, or French diplomat at the time, says, "Yeah, the coup was maybe a little bit about the calls for reparations." Right. So you see when Haitian governments try and exert some independence, try and demand respect, try and demand right, these things from the international community that has sucked so much wealth out of the country for so long, what the costs are, right? And the transitional government that took power after that coup, the first thing they did was renounce the calls for reparations, renounce the calls for paying back that debt to the Haiti. And so, of course, these things are hugely important. And I think, we're talking now, there's a huge debate. What's the role of international actors? How can the world who sees what's happening and wants to do something, how can they support Haiti? I think there's two things. One is let Haitians actually determine their own future for a change. Right? This is something we haven't allowed to happen through our intervention for a long time. But also, we need to be having a real conversation about reparations. We need to be having a real conversation about this debt, about the debt that the world owes to Haiti. And it's not just France. The United States was involved in the perpetuation of this debt, and it's the rest of the world too. Haiti was a beacon of freedom for everybody, not just fighting against the U.S. and France, right? And they played an important role in providing safe haven and resources to Bolivar in his own fight for independence for South America. So the region as a whole and the world, I would argue, owe a tremendous debt to Haiti. And if we want to talk about how the world can help Haiti, let's have a conversation about that.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Jean-Bertrand Aristide a couple of times there, so we better talk about him a little bit because he's still actually involved in Haitian politics to a certain extent. Yeah, I mean, I guess in the 20th century, France's power really started to wane and the United States became the dominant global force. And we see that just looking at the history of Haiti, as you said, in 1915, the United States invaded Haiti and stayed there till 1934. And even though they pulled the troops out after that, they were still supporting all manner of authoritarian dictatorial regimes after that. Perhaps the most notable are the Duvalier regimes of Papa Doc and Baby Doc, who slaughtered unknowable amounts of their opponents, turned the island into just a terrible place. And only after Papa Doc and Baby Doc were gone did Haiti have its first democratic election, where something extraordinary happened, where a US-sponsored candidate from the ex-World Bank official Marc Bazin was supposedly a shoo-in for the victory, but unbeknownst to the United States, people in Haiti were actually organizing in the mountains and the villages and the towns and the suburbs. And they elected their own candidate, a populist priest called Jean-Bertrand Aristide, who immediately shook things up and wanted to change Haiti for the better and really wanted to bring back that spirit of Toussaint Louverture and Jean-Jacques Dessalines and the revolutionary figures in Haiti. He wasn't, I wouldn't describe him as like an extraordinary revolutionary like that, but he certainly wanted to bring about change. And because of that, the United States came in. He was, deposed in a coup in 1991. And then, after that, he like every time he gets elected, he just, gets shown the door immediately. But I think Aristide is somebody who really, if you study him and Haiti, you really start to understand how the world works in terms of empires and imperialism.
Yeah, I think there's no question. And I think, again, we talked about what happened in the 2000s with you can see how this soft power works, how money flows change hands, change directions, where those resources start to go. So when Aristide gets to power, even in the first time in 1990, the U.S. response to that was to start organizing private sector actors in Haiti to push back on his agenda, which was raising the minimum wage and doing this very basic minimum things for a population that, again, had been totally excluded from life. It's important to note, I mean, Aristide was overthrown in 1991. He set up a government in exile, and it was 20,000 U.S. troops that returned him to power in 1994, right under Bill Clinton. And of course, while that was in one respect a great triumph for democracy, the return of Aristide, it came with significant cost as well. That wasn't free, and it wasn't free for Haitians because there were huge economic changes that were required as part of returning Aristide to power. And that had a tremendous impact on Haiti and Haiti's ability to succeed economically moving forward. So there were certain costs there. But of course, and we see this time and again, is political wins in the United States have a significant impact on what's happening in Haiti. So the administration changes, Bush comes back to office, and you have the return of a bunch of neocon cold warriors who had helped lay the groundwork for Aristide's initial overthrow back in power and set about doing the exact same thing in the early 2000s. And I think it's important to note, this is not to say that Aristide is a perfect figure, right? Or was a perfect leader, or did not make mistakes or get involved in plenty of things that look very ugly, because I think we need to own that. But we also need to understand this broader context. There's a huge difference between that dynamic in the early 2000s, when you had the entire foreign community basically opposed to a government, forcing a government to try and consolidate whatever it could just to hang on, versus what we've seen over the last 15 years in Haiti, where you've seen the proliferation of gangs, massive corruption, drug trafficking, and all these things that Aristide was accused of, but it happening with the direct support of the international community, right? So these are very different scenarios, and the dynamics and the geopolitical dynamics and the role of international actors were very different at these disparate times.
Yeah, just to be clear, basically the deal Aristide was offered was you can come back, but you have to implement your opponent's economic policy, which kind of undermines the concept of democracy in the first place. But okay, I wanted to ask you about
US. And connects right back to what we're seeing today, where you can be part of the government if you accept these conditions.
Yeah, exactly. What about US aid as well? We should talk about that, because in 2010, there was a gigantic earthquake that destroyed the country and led to the deaths of some 100,000 people. And amid the destruction, the US sent a huge amount of aid, but this aid was really a double-edged sword, to say the least, wasn't it? In fact, foreign interference in Haiti has often been disguised as aid.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think sometimes that's overt, right? That aid actually is directly political. So there are different agencies, parts of USAID, the National Endowment for Democracy, International Republican Institute that we've seen. IRI, for example, was extremely involved in laying the groundwork for the overthrow of Aristide. So there's these direct things, but there's also just the general long-term political effects of foreign aid, because what actually happens is this continually undermines the state, and it undermines grassroots organizations and local organizations. And so what we've seen over time has been this outsourcing of the state, an increasing reliance on aid, on outside actors for basic public services. And this has, again, we talked earlier about the dynamic between the state and the people, and its inability or unwillingness to actually be representative of and accountable to that population. And this perpetuates it, right? This aid undermining the state only furthers that dynamic. But it has long-term political effects too, because if you don't interact with the state, if it's all these external actors and private sector actors that are providing government services, that are doing the basic things that you would expect a government to do, the average citizen has no way to hold those actors accountable. They can't elect the head of the World Bank. They can't elect the head of a for-profit development company that gets tens of millions of dollars from USAID. Those organizations, they're not accountable to the Haitian people. They're accountable to donors. They're accountable to their boards that are generally not in Haiti at all. And so what does that do to a relationship between a people and their government, to a democratic process? That there are reasons beyond just U.S. interventionism in terms of overturning election results or choosing Haiti's leaders that people don't want to go vote or don't care about going to vote because the government is not present in their lives. And this is a policy that is perpetuated and a dynamic that is perpetuated through these continual aid interventions. And so there's a desire to do something, right? We're seeing it again today is, well, the situation is really bad. People are struggling. We need to get more aid into Haiti. Well, okay, maybe, but what kind of aid? And is that aid going to really help the Haitian people chart their own future, take care of these issues in a sustainable manner? Or is it going to further undermine these efforts? Is it actually going to blow back? And I think what we've seen from the past is that these policies blow back. It was no surprise that the Haitian state is struggling today or on the verge of collapse or however you want to describe it, because it was always unsustainable. It's been propped up by continual foreign intervention, but it was never sustainable. And its eventual sort of blowback was just a matter of time.
This whole situation reminds me of the concept of the shock doctrine or disaster capitalism, where whenever there's some sort of big juncture, big rupture, like an earthquake or some natural disaster or a war, powerful groups will try and use the people's collective shock to try and ram through huge economic changes. And that really seems to be what's happened in Haiti, where these groups are claiming that they're aiding the country, but they're actually setting up special economic zones of, sweatshops to, build in the north of the country and like bring so many people from Port-au-Prince there so they can become, cheap sweatshop workers making baseballs or T-shirts for the American market, so big international companies can profit and exploit these people who've lost their homes. This is all couched in the terms of aid and helping the Haitian people, but it is, to say the least, it's far from clear whether it actually helps them at all. We don't have too much time left and no time short for you. I also wanted to ask you about something you said recently. I'm going to read your quote. The great irony is that our policies seem, on the one hand, to be very motivated by trying to prevent migration, and yet it is our policies that are also overwhelmingly responsible for creating migration. And you're talking about the policies towards Haiti. Could you expand on that for us, please?
Yeah, I think, we take a step back, you look at the two periods of the greatest levels of migration out of Haiti, and it was the 80s and the 2010s, right after the earthquake. And those coincide with two periods of really the greatest influx of U.S. foreign investment and foreign aid into Haiti. And I think there's a relationship there. We have to look at these root causes. And so, of course, right now with the political environment in the U.S., it's easy to think that our overriding priorities are to prevent migration. And I think we think about it a little bit too narrowly, because to me, what U.S. politicians actually care about is not stopping migration. They want to stop the domestic political blowback from migration, right? But the reality is that the unsustainable state that they are propping up in Haiti its survival depends on continued migration. Haiti, right now, remittances, the money that Haitians are sending back to Haiti, it's 20% of GDP. Right? This is more, the Haitian economy is more reliant on that than on foreign assistance or any other flow of money. And so the sustainability of this unsustainable state relies upon continued migration. What really concerns US policymakers is the political impact for themselves. And so that doesn't mean stopping migration. It means stopping big waves of migration that generate headlines and that generate political costs. And I think we see this time and again where foreign policy choices of the United States government are determined by domestic politics far more so than anything on the ground or the effects themselves of these policies.
Well, okay, last question. Migration is a big issue in the United States, and it's a real political football. And of course, we do have an election coming up in a few months. Looks like it's going to be Joe Biden versus Donald Trump. And of course, both Biden and Trump have got very controversial migration and immigration plans. What do you see as the potential future for Haiti if, say, the Trump administration gets into power rather than the Biden administration? Will it be business as usual, or will things change?
Yeah, I think the reality, we've seen this for a very long time. There are small changes, but that US policy toward Haiti has been largely bipartisan for a very, very long time. You don't see big pockets of either party pushing back on general policy to Haiti because there's largely agreement between both parties about how to treat Haiti. And that's sort of the sad reality. So how it would change specifically, look, I don't think we can really project based on from either of these administrations precisely how they do, but there was large continuation of the policies towards Haiti from the previous Trump administration to the Biden administration. The previous Trump administration was a huge supporter of Jovenel Moïse, specifically because they wanted Haiti to turn and vote Venezuela out of the OAS. And so they needed an ally. They needed to break the CARICOM and break the Caribbean community, which had voted as a bloc in favor of Venezuela. And that Haiti was a big part of that. That was why the Trump administration very blatantly was backing the Moïse administration. But when Biden came into office, again, like we were talking about earlier, they continued that. They didn't say, oh, take a step back. Let's see how we could do this different. They said, oh, we recognize this guy. His term lasts another year. Forget whatever we're hearing from Haiti. So we saw that continuation. We saw the continuation of the treatment of Haitian migrants from the Biden administration. Of course, what happened in Del Rio in September of 2021, and the deportations and repatriations that are happening to Haitians. Even now, Coast Guard repatriated 65 people to Haiti just a few days ago, while every embassy in the country is evacuating staff by helicopter to the Dominican Republic. And we're repatriating migrants right now, okay? So these are reprehensible policies that have been continued by both administrations. And the real fear for me in the short run, we've seen this for 30 plus years, 40 years, 50 years, is that in an election, Democrats are so concerned by the criticism from Republicans around migration that they end up implementing really draconian, awful immigration policies. And it has generally been Haitian migrants who are the ones targeted in order to send that message and blunt that criticism from Republicans. And so we've seen this time again, Carter, from Clinton, from Obama, and again and again and again, from Biden right now. We're hearing, every Haitian that arrives is going to be immediately repatriated. There's talk of using Guantánamo to hold migrants intercepted at sea. There's nothing about our acknowledgement of perpetuating this, our acknowledgement that we are responsible as much as anything else for what's causing Haitians to flee. But again, being used in domestic political fights. And that has real implications, right? That has real costs for the Haitian people. And to be used in that way, as a sort of cudgel, use a shield against Republican criticism, I think tells us a lot about what U.S. priorities really are.
Sure. Okay, we've run out of time. Jake Johnston, can you tell us, last question then, can you tell us where people can follow your work?
Yeah, so it's cepr.net. And that's the main place where we put up analysis on Haiti and stuff like that. And, obviously also on social media and places like that. Right now things moving really fast. Things are changing by the hour. So yeah, I'd recommend following us there.
All right. Thank you for your time today.
All right. Thank you.
And thank you for listening, listeners or viewers. If you're still with us, let me give you a quick plug for our Patreon. We are constantly getting demonetized from so many platforms. So if you are in an economic position to support us, do drop us a line over on patreon.com. There should be a link in the description of wherever you're reading this. If you're not in a position to do that, you can still help us by liking the stream or giving it a 5-star rating or just sharing it with your friends. Until next week, I'm your host, Alan McLeod. See ya.